the loyal drums did beat. The loving English feet they walked all over us. And every single night when me da would come home tight, he'd invite the neighbours out with this chorus. Come out, shake like and tans, come out and fight me like a man. Show your wife how you won medals down in Flanders. Tell her how the IRA made you run like hell away from the green and lovely lanes of Killishandra. Come, let us hear you tell how you slandered great Parnell when you taught them well and truly persecuted. What are the sneers and jeers that you loudly let us hear when our leaders of 16 were executed? Come out, shake like and tans, come out and fight me like a man. Show your wife how you won medals down in Flanders. Tell her how the IRA made you run like hell away from the green and lovely lanes of Killishandra. How you slew them all Arabs 2 by 2. Like the Zulus they had spears, a bow and arrows. Oh bravely you faced one with your 16-pounder gun, and you frightened them damn natives to the marrow. Come out, shipwreck and tans, come out and fight me like a man. Show your wife how you won medals down in Flanders. Tell her how the IRA made you run like hell away from the green and lovely lanes of Killishandra.
You're a good debater and you're not afraid of a fight. So why have your comments off? Just out of curiosity.
Well, I've turned them on for a lot of things.
On your shorts you do.
Right. In some of my lives, I think they're on. But almost as soon as I turn them on, there's photos of my family's homes.
Okay.
What's the address?
Yeah.
And at what point, and I just want to clarify.
Yeah, please.
I don't have to take that abuse.
Agreed.
Like, I don't come to work and slap the dick out of their mouth.
Kind of why do you have a disdain for informants, in your opinion?
I don't disdain them. I downright fucking hate them. That's okay. But see, this is why I can say it. That guy Jeff's crazy. He's on medication. I have a disdain for them because no man should ever go to prison on the words of another man, number one. Number two, in 90% of the cases you look at, the informant has done more vile and disturbing crap than those that are being accused. Number three, I find it oxymoronic when a man, Joey Merlino, because everybody knows who he is, he goes in front of a judge, they can bring up everything he's ever been accused of, including murders and whatever else. Even though he's acquitted, it doesn't really matter because it's a character judgment. But yet in that same case, you can't turn that around and say, well, let's judge the rat. Judges don't allow that. So for me, it's like you're walking in, you're already behind the eight ball.
And now it's time for Mob Talk Radio with your host, Jeff Canarsie.
And welcome to Mob Talk Radio. I am your host, Jeff Canarsie. And today, first and foremost, hello to everybody. How you doing? We are going to be back on the podcast starting this Friday, and we're going to be releasing a little bit of material here on YouTube a couple of times a week. But as far as the lives, those are going to stop for a while because we're working on some other things. In any event, today we are going to be talking about Jimmy Coonan. And there's a reason why. I mean, obviously, Jimmy is trying to get out of prison. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about that today. There's a little movement, but not really enough for me to really talk about because there's nothing concrete. But for Jimmy Coonan, he's 77 years old, you know, and we know he's the former Westies leader. He's trying hard to get out. He's been incarcerated since 1998 for murder, racketeering, loan sharking, and about every single predicate act that you might suspect comes with a RICO Act conviction. So for 36 years, he's been in prison. And according to his attorneys, he's been an exemplary inmate. So for 36 years, Jimmy's seen a lot of change, right? He's had a lot of time to think about his past. Roy DeMeo's dead. Paul Castellano's dead. John Gotti's fucking dead. And there are so many others that Coonan bumped up against while leading the Westies. And if you don't know who the Westies are, they were the Irish Mafia that were in the Hell's Kitchen city limits and beyond. So for Jimmy Coonan, he did try to get out. He tried to appeal back in August of this year, or of 2023. Jimmy Coonan, through his attorneys Joe Carrazzo and Thomas Miraglano, requested that Coonan's sentence be commuted and he be sent back home to New Jersey to finish out his sentence through the First Step Act, which a lot of people have sort of tried to employ. His request obviously was denied. And even through his attorneys, they presented a multitude of physical and health ailments and things that were both positive for him. And they said no. Coonan would then appeal that sort of decision, and it was totally ignored. Coonan does have, however, a mandatory out date, and that is 2030, which is 6 years from now, and Coonan would be 83 years old. And so logically, you have to kind of think, with the release of Anthony Center and Joey Testa, Anthony Center's already been out. Joey Testa is going to be out next month and heading to Las Vegas. One may sort of make the argument that the decision merited to both of those guys should probably be merited to Jimmy Coonan as well. I mean, after all, he has done 36 years in prison. Both Anthony and Joey did over 30 years as well. And while the guidelines in the Center and Testa situation are completely different, because had it not been for incorrect guidelines, both Anthony and Joey would probably never see the outside world ever again. Those are just facts. And the difference between the three men likely has more to do with the halt in affording Coonan the First Step Act. He was a leader of a criminal organization. Both Center and Joey Testa were not. And I'm certainly not going to entertain the morality of what these men are alleged to have done. But if you're counting stats over here, Coonan most definitely doesn't have the body count of the other two. Let's just be realistic. But that's if you believe what the feds have alleged for 36 years. So what's the difference here? And I think the difference is that Jimmy led the Irish Mafia. He was, the John Gotti in name only. I'm not comparing him to John Gotti, but he was the John Gotti of the Westies, so to speak, of the Irish mob. Everything that happened in Hell's Kitchen and beyond, the feds claim he ordered or somehow orchestrated. And that's their stance, not mine. And I think if you peer into Jimmy's case, if you do a deep dive, you're going to find, just as I have over the years, a lot of discrepancies with the informants in that case, which really oddly parallels the same division of culpability when it comes to Anthony and Joey Testa. All three had things attached to them by proxy, not necessarily by involvement, as Anthony and Joey were convicted of murders they had nothing to do with. But because RICO is all-encompassing, that's sort of how it works. And that's exactly why the RICO laws should be adjusted, not necessarily amended, but adjusted. But that's why they're never going to do it. So, Jimmy Coonan was a marked guy from day one. The Italians desperately wanted control of the Javits Center, the concrete and the rebar that was going in, and Mickey Spillane refused. It was his turf, his area, and he wasn't going to bend to the Italians in any shape or form. Tony Salerno, on the other hand, was a little fed up and orders his death. Obviously, we know that comes from somebody else, but Salerno was the messenger, okay? And anybody who didn't back down was going to be murdered as well. And there were an awful lot of people murdered within a year's time. So much so it decimated whatever was left of the Westies prior to Jimmy Coonan taking over. But Jimmy Coonan, they also needed somebody. Salerno and the Italians needed somebody that they could trust. They could help control the issues. And that guy came in the form of Jimmy Coonan, who already had a beef with Mickey Spillane over Mickey Spillane basically treating his father like a degenerate. slapping him around, et cetera, et cetera. So a Coonan, accepts that role. And the rest is sort of history. I'm not going to go through the whole entire history of the Westies, but eventually Coonan and the Westies would fall under the control of the Gambino crime family through Paul Castellano, who would then put, of all people, in charge of overseeing the Westies, Roy DeMeo. I mean, that's just odd to me. Like, of all people, you're going to put one psychopath with, whatever. And everything went sideways, as we know from there. Eventually, friends and contemporaries would turn into fucking rats. And Jimmy Coonan would be sent away, getting handed a 75-year sentence. Jimmy has been up for parole since 1998, and he's been denied every single time. In February of 2023, he had another parole hearing in which he explained that he had behaved well in prison. He'd turned a corner in life, cited his shot-free jacket. For those that have been in prison will understand what I just said, and how he's mentored under, younger inmates to stay away from the life of crime. And that's all great, fine, and dandy, because words are just words, actions are actions, right? But as well, he cited physical ailments and health issues as well. And as you know, especially during COVID, a lot of guys were trying to get out. Some of them actually did. Some of them actually didn't. But anyway, he gets denied again. And that's where Joe Carrazzo and Miragalano step in as attorneys. Keep in mind, filth bags like Mickey Featherstone, who committed at least 5 murders that we know of, got 5 years probation for those murders in return for pointing the finger at Jimmy Coonan. He got 1 year probation for every life he took. That's just insane to me. So the question becomes with Jimmy is, should he get released? Should he get released after serving 36 years? And there's going to be a lot of people who are going to sit on two sides of the fence when it comes to Jimmy Coonan. One, they cite his brutality, either founded or unfounded by a conviction, which we could argue for 10 years about, giving the exculpatory evidence, which was completely fraudulent in many cases, and the testimony from informants who were pretty much more brutal than Coonan ever was. So on its heels, when you look at a case like Jimmy Coonan's, and then you compare that to Anthony Center or Joey Testa, it's kind of hard not to feel like Coonan deserves a shot. I'm not arguing he should get out. I'm just saying, based on in comparison to those two guys, it's sort of hard not to feel like Coonan deserves another shot. The differences, however, are what's keeping Coonan locked up just outside of Philadelphia. He was a leader of an organized crime group, and they always hammer the leader harder than the ones who actually did all of the murders themselves. He also didn't have a sentencing discrepancy like Anthony Center and Joey Testa. But if you're going to have the moral argument, then what's good for 2 should be good for 3, in my opinion. I mean, has he been, punished enough? And really, what exactly is enough? And those are questions that I cannot, nor would I attempt to answer. I'm not the judge. I'm not the jury. I'm not the executioner. But I can tell you this. Look at the trial, look at the transcripts, look at the testimony, and ask yourself some really hard questions when you go through those files. And I don't think that Jimmy ever claimed to be a fucking saint. I don't think he ever denied for 10 seconds who he was and who he became. But the totality of the crimes that were shoved down the public's throat are swayed more towards looking for somebody to take the full brunt of those actions. But we know how the streets operate, right? So, for instance, how many things did Gravano do that Gotti was unaware of? And this is more indicative of how the RICO laws are warped and wrapped around people. And the funny part is that law by its design was meant for big companies, banking industries, and they've only ever really used it for organized crime. I mean, a fair and balanced justice system doesn't work. Anybody that tells you that it's fair and balanced is full of shit. It's not. This country has always had sort of the motto, innocent till proven guilty, but it's really quite the reverse, especially when informants are not subjected to RICO laws. And that's what always amazes me about how they weave the law when it comes to penalty phases. It affects those they want it to affect, and it seems they seem to forget about the law when it comes to the informants. especially when a stool pigeon is looking to get underneath of a case. So you're going to have to decide what you think about Jimmy Coonan, his past, and whether he should, get out. And what you see on the screen was his inmate request to appeal the decision to get out on the First Step Act. And that's his handwriting, his signature, and all of that good stuff. My opinion is he should probably get out. He's done his time. Whether or not he has to wait 6 more years is going to be a decision for those overseeing his case. But if you look at all of those who have attempted to get out early, it seems like the feds and the government and the judges pick and choose who they're going to allow that First Step Act or the coronavirus bullshit. It's like picking a name out of a fucking hat. Oh, this one can go. This one can go. Nope, not this one, not this one. If Jimmy Coonan wasn't the leader of the Westies, he'd have been out. Seriously, that's what I believe. If you notice, anybody who's been in a leadership role hasn't gotten out. It's others. And that it just seems like they can pick and choose who they're going to let out and whatever. Is 36 years enough time? And there are going to be the morality people that are going to say, well, no, he took lives. He should never get out. And I have no problem with people that believe that. But you let out 2 other guys, but you can't let out the third. And what about Henry Borelli? You can't let him out. And the only reason why they're not letting him out is because he had a plea deal. He signed a fucking plea deal. If Henry Borelli never signs that plea deal and still gets hammered with 100 years, he's home today. Good old dirty Henry. He'd have been out. But I'm sure as a result of Center and Testa getting out, he's going to try again. But the problem with the plea deal is you're accepting the penalty at that point. And that's the problem with the plea deals is, out of the gate, even if evidence comes up, 5 years into your 20-year sentence that proves you didn't do it, you're screwed because you admitted to it. Look at the West Memphis 3. These are 3 kids that were proven not to have committed atrocious murders with 2 young children. All the DNA proved they had nothing to do with it. All the case files proved they had nothing to do with it. But guess what? That fucking state and city made them still plead guilty to exit prison. Well, I tell you what, all the evidence tells us you guys did not do this. You've spent 20-some years in prison. Your childhood's ruined. You're walking out a 40-something-year-old. We know you didn't do it, but you're still going to have to plead guilty to it. Like, it's nonsense. It's nonsense. And you guys can look into the West Memphis 3 yourself. That's a horrible case. But that's what makes the system corrupt. But what it should be is either across the board or don't do it at all. And that's sort of where we're at with this. Does he get out? Here's what I think is logically going to, even though there's a little movement, I know, behind the scenes, the reality is this. He's a 77-year-old man. He would be 83 when he would get out of prison. Listen, at that age, having 3 more years, a lot of people, or 4 more years, whatever the case may be, 6 more years, which is actually the case, that could be a death sentence for people. And I'm not arguing, let him out and, let him out of the jail and let him go about his life. I'm not arguing that at all. But I'm saying if you're going to do it for 2 others who have perhaps a more gruesome background, whether or not the allegations are true, let's just go on what they got convicted of. Convicted doesn't necessarily mean they did it. It just means that people believe they did it. But if that's the case, then what's good for 2 should be good for 3 or good for 4. And I think you'd be hard pressed to not disagree. But once again, I'm not going to argue the morality of all of that. I'm just not. So let me know what you guys think. Hit me up at mobtalkradioshow@gmail.com. We got a new podcast dropping Friday, and we'll see everybody soon. Have a good one.